Hey guys, Maze here, bringing another tutorial for you guys today, and as you may have guessed, the next tutorial is going to be on the Zerg. Now, I wanted to show the Zerg in their natural habitat, so I built this little environment for you guys, so it would be a little bit more interesting while I talk at you about Zergling, or Zerg units and Zerg strategy. So why don't we get started with the first unit, which is going to be the Zergling. Now, Zerglings are the basic infantry unit for the Zerg. You can mass them early game, and you can pretty much be making these units all throughout the game, but they serve different roles. So in the beginning, they're pretty much just your basic infantry. They're not all that great against Zealots. They're okay against Marines, but really until you get Zergling speed, they're not going to be all that great in the early game, or past the early game. So once you get Zergling speed, then they start to be really good against things like Stalkers, because they can surround Stalkers, Immortals. They're really good at trapping, so they're almost kind of like very expensive sentry force fields, as they can trap units really well. But pretty much mid to late game, what you can use Zerglings for, you don't really want to use them in head-to-head combat too much unless you are fighting like a Stalker army. But they are really good for going around the map, being very fast and sniping out expansions and workers and stuff, so they're good raiding units. So Zerglings are great for that. You can be making them all throughout the game, even with their frenzy attack upgrade in tier 3. You still kind of want to avoid them using them in huge battles unless you kind of use them as a flank or something. They're not really very meaty, even though they do come in huge numbers. Alright, so the next unit is going to be the Queen. Now, Queens are being used more and more as the game evolves and progresses, because people have realized that the way I like to think about it is Queens are kind of just like photon cannons in the beginning, where they're defensive units. Now, they're obviously not as strong, but they are mobile, and people have been using multiple Queens. Sometimes they'll get like 3 or 4 Queens for early to mid game for defense. And the reason they do that is because strategies like mass Void Rays can really hurt Zerg early on, because they don't have much to fight against air, except for Queens and Spore Crawlers. They need to get a Hydralisk Den or a Spire. And Protoss can get a Void Ray out much faster than Zerg can get a tech out like that, because most Zerg tend to fast expand. So what people do to compensate for that is they'll get multiple Queens and they'll fight Void Rays and they'll start healing each other. So definitely don't be afraid to make more Queens than you need to. Aside from that, use their Creep Tumor and their Spawn Larva as much as you need. I wouldn't recommend... make sure that you are keeping your larva spawn on time. If you do it perfectly throughout the game, you'll just have enough mana all the time to keep spawning larvae. So if you do want Creep Tumors and you are very good at your spawn larva, then again, you're going to need another Queen for that. So Queen's great defensive unit to have. And the next is Banelings. Banelings are pretty much my favorite unit for the Zerg, because they just look like they have these huge exploding sacks in the end. They look like spider Zerglings. They're just awesome. And the reason I like them so much is because not only do they look cool, but they explode into masses of units. So if someone is going mass Zerglings and you also have Zerglings and you make a Baneling nest, you can kill like 8 of their Zerglings with one Baneling, because they just do so much damage to them. They annihilate Zerglings immediately. So Banelings are very good against Zerglings and Marines, and they're pretty good too against penetrating bases. So you'll need about 5 Zerglings to get through a pylon or a supply depot. So if you want to get through a base and you can't, get some Banelings, and you should be able to after that. One thing I would recommend, if you are going to do a Baneling bust, bring some Zerglings out with your Banelings to take some of the fire, so you'll make sure that you will have as many as you need to break through that gate. The next unit is the Roach. Now, the Roach is very good unit. You can also be making it throughout the entire game. A very meaty unit, very powerful. They attack slow, but they do have a very powerful attack. And Roaches are great against Zerglings, Zealots, Marines, so they pretty much counter anything in tier 1. And in terms of Stalkers, you want to get speed for Roaches, or else you'll be able to get trained around by Stalkers throughout the entire game. So definitely, if you are going to go mass Roaches against Stalkers or something like that, you are going to want to get speed, or else you're going to be in a lot of trouble. If you don't have speed, or if it's going to take too long for you to get, start making out some Zerglings so you can counter those Stalkers. And they are decent against Marauders, but you are going to need to get some other units, like Hydralisk or Zerglings or Banelings. You're going to need a mix with Roaches if you want to counter Marine Marauder. And the next is the Overlord. I'm showing them now because they're not really all that useful until you get a layer, and then they can start generating creep. So once you upgrade Overlord's speed, you can start generating creep everywhere, and pretty much what this does is it makes creep. You can't really see it right now because I already have creep on the map, but you can fire overlords out to different expansions and start spawning creep in those places, and even if they kill your overlord, they're going to need to wait like a minute for all the creep to go away. So they are very good for denying expansions, at least for a certain period of time. Also, you can kind of move your overlords out with your attack to gain some map control and start expanding out your creep highway with your creep tumors and overlords. So they are purposeful for that aspect. And then the next is the Overseer. Now, Overseer is the detector. For those of you guys who are coming off StarCraft 1, Overlords are not detectors. Overseers are detectors. So get an Overseer if you can't see any invisible units. And you can make these at Tier 2, and one cool thing that the Overseers have is that they have Changelings. Now, I really like Changelings. They are really funny kind of units. I always thought they kind of looked like Gollum from Lord of the Rings hiding in a cave, and then he just kind of pops out. And yeah, so pretty much what happens is the Changeling will take the form of any enemy unit, any basic enemy unit that you come in contact with. So if fighting Terran, you're going to turn into a Marine, and you can pretty much act as a spy. So yeah, pretty cool units. They don't cost a lot, and they're pretty good scouts too. Make sure if you are playing Zerg, use your Overlords, use your Changelings. You have the best scouting abilities in the game, I think. I mean, scans are great too, but Overlords are very versatile, and they can move around a lot. And the next unit is the Hydralisk. The Hydralisk is kind of like the Marauder of the Zerg infantry, and what I mean by that is that they can be used for pretty much any situation, but unlike the Marauder, they can attack air, so Hydralisks are even better than the Marauder in that sense. So lots of times people will go mass roaches and Hydralisks because that's a pretty good dynamic mix for people to counter almost any kind of army. So that's sort of like the Marine Marauder of Zerg, Roach Hydralisk. So you can't get Hydralisk until Tier 2. Again, if you're coming off StarCraft 1, you have to wait until your second tier to make Hydralisks. They are very powerful. They do pretty good damage. They are sort of slow, but they do make up for it in their meatiness in numbers and their powerful attacks. And the next unit I'm going to be talking about is the Mutalisks. Now, Mutalisks are fantastic raiders. Mutalisks are really fast, and they have a glaive ability, which makes it very good for them to pick off workers and things like that, because their attacks will bounce around. And one great use of Mutalisks is that you can use them to raid expansions and harass mineral lines. Zerg have tons of mobility, so between Zerglings and Mutalisks, which is actually a strategy, lots of people do go Mutalisk Zergling because of that mobility, you can do lots of damage to people's forces. And now, Mutalisks in mass numbers, since Zerg can really hard switch, you can even counter something like a Stalker build. Let's say Protoss has Zealot, Stalkers, and a couple other units. If you just go mass Mutalisks, you'll be able to overwhelm them, and you'll be able to mass that much quicker than they're going to be able to produce Phoenixes or anything like that. And same goes for Terran. They won't be able to get enough anti-air. They need Thors really to deal with Mutalisks in such big numbers, but Thors are slow and Mutalisks are not. So that would be my advice there. If you're going to be using Mutalisks, use them as a harass unit, or if you are going to be massing them to use as a brute force, do a hard switch and make a lot of them. The next unit is going to be an Infestor. Now, Infestors are awesome. They are the spellcasting unit for Terran. They make infested Terrans, which you plop out an egg, and then infested Terran will come out. And one thing that someone told me recently is that you can actually use infested Terran while burrowed, so check that out. That's really cool. You can just stay by someone's mineral line and start popping out eggs, and people will be like, what's going on? Most people don't know you can burrow infestors and do that. So that's one use of the Infestor. The next is the Fungal Growth. Now, Fungal Growth is great. You can trap units like Mutalisks. I didn't really do it. I think that's just my unit, so you can't get trapped. No. So you can trap Mutalisks if you're getting harassed a lot, and you'll be able to deal with them with Hydralisks, and you can actually outrange the Mutalisks. So Fungal Growth is a great crowd control move. It's kind of like a Protoss force field, Sentry force field, in the sense that you can kind of control how an army is split. So let's say they have Immortals, and you don't want their Immortals to hit your Roaches. If you Fungal Growth